June 1944, Carentan, France. Canvas hospital tents buzz with generator hum as captured German nurses are stunned by America's medical abundance. What they witness defies everything they know about battlefield medicine. Inside these makeshift hospitals, American medics casually unpack crates filled with miracles, endless supplies of penicillin, refrigerated blood plasma, and morphine syrettes. Electric suction machines hum alongside portable X-ray units. Wounded soldiers receive treatment that would be reserved for generals in German hospitals. The German nurses whisper in disbelief. Back home, their medical supplies have been reduced to boiled rags and rationed morphine. They reuse bandages until they fall apart. Meanwhile, American privates receive fresh plasma transfusions as if it costs nothing. To German eyes, this is not medicine, but sorcery, wrapped in cardboard and ice. The abundance seems impossible, yet here it flows like water from an endless spring. How did America transform its entire industrial machine into a weapon of healing? What these nurses witness will haunt them forever. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Dawn mist clung to the Normandy coast as generator lights glowed through canvas hospital tents near Carentan. The steady hum of electrical equipment mixed with the distant rumble of artillery. Inside these makeshift medical facilities, Captain Winifred Quick Collins of the United States Navy, Nurse Corps, supervised the organized chaos that followed the D-Day landings. Wounded soldiers arrived on stretchers in endless waves. American medics moved with practiced efficiency, unpacking wooden crates marked with red crosses. The contents seemed inexhaustible: sterile bandages wrapped in waxed paper, glass bottles of blood plasma chilled in portable refrigeration units, morphine syrettes sealed in individual packages, and small glass vials containing the miracle drug penicillin. The captured German nurses stood in stunned silence. They had been taken prisoner when their field hospital was overrun 2 days earlier. Now they watched American abundance unfold before their eyes like scenes from a fever dream. One German nurse whispered to another in disbelief as she observed electric suction machines removing blood from wounds, portable X-ray units revealing internal injuries, and sterilization equipment that seemed to belong in a peacetime city hospital rather than a battlefield tent. Back in their homeland, medical supplies had become more precious than gold. They had learned to boil and reuse bandages until the fabric disintegrated. Morphine was rationed so severely that many wounded soldiers received nothing stronger than aspirin. The sight of Americans casually discarding used medical supplies seemed like witnessing criminal waste. Captain Collins noticed their expressions. She understood their shock. By June 1944, the United States had shipped over 1.2 million units of penicillin to European theaters. Germany possessed virtually none. The statistical disparity represented more than mere numbers. It demonstrated the fundamental difference between industrial democracy and totalitarian scarcity. To the German nurses, this abundance appeared supernatural. They watched American medics treat wounded privates with the same attention reserved for generals in German hospitals. Fresh plasma flowed freely. Sterile instruments gleamed under electric lights. Portable generators provided reliable power for life-saving equipment. The contrast between their experience and this American reality seemed to violate natural law. The cold corridors of Berlin military hospitals echoed with different sounds. Candles flickered in glass holders, their weak light barely illuminating the overcrowded wards. German medical staff moved quietly between beds, conserving their dwindling supplies like misers counting coins. Wilhelm Keitel received reports that painted an increasingly grim picture. Sulfa drug reserves had fallen 70% below minimum requirements by late 1943. Morphine stocks approached complete exhaustion. Medical officers submitted requisitions, knowing they would be denied. The arithmetic of scarcity governed every medical decision. German doctors had learned to improvise with desperate creativity. They fashioned splints from salvaged wood. Bandages were washed, boiled, and reused until they fell apart in their hands. Surgical instruments, once sharp and precise, had been sharpened so many times they barely functioned. The smell of infection permeated wards where wounded soldiers lay untreated, their fate determined by the absence of medicines that might have saved them. In these dim corridors, conversations occurred in whispers. Medical staff spoke of shortages with the fatalism of people watching their world collapse. They had witnessed casualty survival rates plummet as Allied bombing systematically destroyed pharmaceutical production facilities across occupied Europe. What had once been a modern medical system had been reduced to medieval standards of care. The reports reaching Berlin High Command contained statistics that revealed the scope of the disaster. Luftwaffe medical units reported supply shortages that made effective treatment impossible. Field hospitals operated without basic necessities. Wounded soldiers who might have recovered with proper medical attention instead became permanent casualties. German medical officers understood the implications. Their healthcare system was not merely experiencing temporary shortages. It was witnessing systematic collapse. Every wounded soldier represented a permanent loss to German military strength. The mathematics of attrition had turned decisively against them, not through enemy action alone, but through the destruction of their capacity to heal their own forces. Meanwhile, intercepted intelligence reports described American medical capabilities that seemed to belong to science fiction rather than battlefield reality. Stories circulated of American field hospitals equipped with electric lighting, refrigerated blood storage, and abundant supplies of medicines German doctors had never seen. These reports were initially dismissed as propaganda, but accumulating evidence made denial impossible. The contrast became a source of profound demoralization. German soldiers understood that wounds which would be easily treatable in American hands meant death or permanent disability in German care. This knowledge spread through the ranks like poison, undermining morale more effectively than any enemy propaganda campaign. In Berlin, they wrote casualty reports with growing desperation. In Normandy, Americans measured their medical abundance by the ton. Steam whistles shrieked across Pittsburgh as the night shift began at Bayer and Company pharmaceutical facilities. The thunder of stamping presses mixed with the rhythmic clank of assembly lines. Women workers in hairnets and factory uniforms moved with purpose between stations, their hands steady as they filled glass bottles with life-saving blood plasma. The smell of hot oil and metal filled the air. Overhead, conveyor belts carried finished products toward shipping areas where wooden crates awaited transport to European battlefields. Each bottle, each syrette, each package represented a direct link between American industrial capacity and battlefield survival thousands of miles away. Surgeon General Norman T. Kirk toured these facilities regularly, understanding that the war would be won or lost as much in these factories as on any battlefield. He watched civilian women, many with sons or husbands fighting. Overseas, worked through double shifts to maintain production, quotas that seemed impossible by peacetime standards. Workers took pride in their contribution. Factory bulletin boards displayed letters from medics describing how these supplies saved lives. "Every vial means a boy comes home" became an unofficial motto that spread through the facility. The connection between their labor and distant battlefields gave meaning to the exhausting work schedules. Production statistics told the story of American industrial transformation. The United States processed 13 million pints of blood plasma during World War II. This figure represented not just medical achievement, but industrial mobilization on a scale never before attempted. Civilian blood donation drives operated in every major city. Processing facilities operated around the clock. Transportation networks delivered fresh supplies to combat zones with clockwork precision. The integration of civilian industry into military logistics created a supply chain that stretched from American living rooms to European battlefields. Citizens who donated blood became part of a vast network that sustained American military operations. Factory workers who packaged medical supplies participated directly in combat effectiveness. The entire home front became an extension of American military power. Kirk understood the strategic implications. Medical abundance translated directly into sustained combat capability. Divisions that could maintain their strength through effective medical care could remain in combat far longer than units that lost men permanently to wounds. The mathematics were simple: heal the wounded quickly, return them to duty, maintain unit strength indefinitely. What departed Pittsburgh in wooden crates would determine the outcome of battles fought on foreign soil. American industrial capacity had become a weapon of war more decisive than tanks or aircraft. The roar of factory equipment in Pennsylvania echoed across the hedgerows of France, carrying the promise of healing to every American soldier who fell. The metallic clink of surgical instruments filled the canvas operating theater as Captain Collins prepared for another emergency surgery. The smell of ether mixed with antiseptic created an atmosphere of sterile urgency. Portable electric lights illuminated the operating table where an American soldier lay unconscious, his abdomen torn open by German artillery shrapnel. German nurses watched in fascination as American medical teams demonstrated procedures they had never witnessed. Refrigerated blood plasma flowed through intravenous lines with steady precision. Electric suction machines removed blood from the wound cavity, maintaining clear surgical fields that would have been impossible under German field conditions. Portable X-ray equipment revealed the exact location of metal fragments, eliminating the guesswork that characterized German battlefield surgery. The wounded soldier received treatment that would have been reserved for the highest-ranking officers in German hospitals. Fresh blood plasma, abundant anesthesia, sterile instruments, and electric lighting created optimal surgical conditions. The German nurses recognized the technical superiority but struggled to comprehend the philosophical implications. American medical doctrine treated every soldier as equally valuable. Collins and her team worked with calm confidence. They possessed abundant supplies of everything necessary for successful surgery. Penicillin prevented infection. Morphine controlled pain. Fresh bandages replaced soiled ones without hesitation. The contrast with German scarcity was so complete that it seemed to exist in a different universe entirely. United States forward. Surgical teams had reduced mortality. Rates for abdominal wounds to 8% by 1944. This achievement was impossible without abundant supplies, reliable equipment, and systematic medical doctrine. German units reported mortality rates exceeding 50% for similar wounds. The statistical difference represented more than medical technique. It demonstrated the power of industrial abundance applied to battlefield medicine. The German nurses understood that they were witnessing American industrial capacity translated into individual human survival. Every successful surgery represented not just medical skill, but the entire American production system working to save a single soldier's life. The complexity and cost seemed staggering, yet Americans treated it as routine. As the surgery concluded successfully, the German nurses exchanged glances that conveyed their recognition of a fundamental truth. American medical abundance multiplied combat effectiveness in ways that transcended traditional military calculations. Where Germany counted corpses, America counted returns to duty. The implications were terrifying for anyone who understood the mathematics of attrition warfare. The wounded American soldier would recover, return to combat, and continue fighting. His German counterpart would have died on the operating table or become permanently disabled. This single surgery represented the industrial war in microcosm: American abundance versus German scarcity, democratic values versus totalitarian expendability, industrial capacity versus military tradition. Cigarette smoke hung heavy in the Berlin bunker as German high command officers spread intelligence reports across oak tables. The harsh light from overhead bulbs illuminated documents that painted an increasingly desperate picture of American medical capabilities on the Western Front. Wilhelm Keitel read field reports that described American medical operations with growing alarm. German reconnaissance had confirmed the existence of fully equipped American field hospitals operating within kilometers of active combat zones. These facilities possessed electric lighting, refrigerated storage, and supplies that exceeded the medical inventory of entire German armies. The strategic implications became clearer with each report. American units maintained combat strength through medical treatment that returned wounded soldiers to active duty. German formations lost personnel permanently to wounds that American medics treated routinely. The mathematics of attrition had shifted decisively against German military. Planning, field commanders reported declining morale as German soldiers learned that wounds survivable in American care meant death or permanent disability in German hospitals. This knowledge spread through the ranks like a contagion, undermining fighting spirit more effectively than any propaganda campaign. Soldiers who understood their medical fate fought with the desperation of men who knew they could not afford to be wounded. Keitel's staff calculated the cumulative effect of differential survival rates. By mid-1944, 70% of American wounded returned to active duty, compared with fewer than 25% of German casualties. This disparity meant that American divisions maintained their strength indefinitely, while German units required constant replacement with increasingly inexperienced personnel. The reports contained details that challenged German understanding of battlefield medicine. American medics possessed portable equipment that exceeded the capabilities of German base hospitals. Individual American soldiers received medical attention that surpassed the treatment available to German generals. The abundance seemed to violate every assumption about military logistics and resource allocation. Intelligence officers struggled to comprehend American medical doctrine. The systematic treatment of common soldiers with expensive medicines and sophisticated equipment appeared economically irrational. Yet the strategic results were undeniable. American combat units sustained their effectiveness through medical intervention rather than personnel replacement. The psychological impact extended beyond military calculations. German soldiers whispered that Americans brought their factories into the battlefield. This perception created the impression that German forces fought not just American military units, but the entire American industrial system. The demoralization was complete and irreversible. Keitel understood that Germany faced an enemy whose medical capabilities represented industrial war at its most advanced level. American medical abundance translated directly into sustained combat power. German scarcity meant permanent personnel losses. The outcome was mathematically inevitable. Norman T. Kirk's Washington office resembled a command center more than a medical facility. Maps covered the walls, connected by colored strings that traced supply routes from American factories to European battlefields. Charts displayed production statistics, casualty rates, and evacuation timelines with the precision of military intelligence. Kirk coordinated a global medical network that dwarfed any healthcare system in human history. Over 700,000 medical personnel served in United States forces by 1945, creating the largest organized medical system ever assembled. This vast apparatus existed solely to maintain American combat effectiveness through systematic healing of battlefield casualties. The integration of civilian industries into military medical logistics represented unprecedented coordination between government and private enterprise. Pharmaceutical companies retooled production lines for military requirements. Blood banks collected donations from millions of civilians. Transportation networks prioritized medical supplies alongside ammunition and fuel. The entire American economy had been transformed into a weapon of healing. Kirk's daily briefings included production statistics that revealed the scope of American medical mobilization. Penicillin production increased 1,000% between 1940 and 1944. Blood plasma processing facilities operated continuously to meet military requirements. Surgical instrument manufacturing expanded to equip thousands of field hospitals across multiple theaters of operation. The strategic vision extended beyond immediate military needs. Kirk understood that medical abundance created sustainable combat power. Units that maintained their strength through effective medical care could remain in combat indefinitely. Divisions that lost personnel permanently to wounds required constant replacement with inexperienced soldiers. Medical superiority translated directly into battlefield advantage. Communication networks connected Kirk's office to field hospitals on every continent where American forces operated. Daily reports provided real-time information about medical supply requirements, casualty rates, and evacuation procedures. This global coordination ensured that American medical capabilities remained constant regardless of geographic location or combat intensity. The statistical results validated Kirk's systematic approach. American casualty survival rates exceeded 96% for wounded soldiers who reached medical care. This achievement required not just medical skill but industrial capacity, logistical coordination, and systematic doctrine applied on a global scale. The complexity and cost were staggering, yet Americans treated it as a routine military requirement. Kirk's empire was invisible to casual observation, yet every American soldier felt its power. Medical abundance had become a weapon of war more decisive than artillery or aircraft. The systematic healing of battlefield casualties created sustainable military power that could outlast any enemy dependent on traditional methods of personnel replacement. Red. Cross trucks bounced along dusty French roads between Normandy and Paris, their canvas covers protecting precious cargo, wounded American soldiers being evacuated from forward aid stations to base hospitals. The convoy moved with practiced efficiency, each vehicle equipped with medical attendants and supplies necessary for extended transport. German prisoners witnessed evacuation procedures that defied their understanding of battlefield logistics. American wounded were removed from combat zones within hours of being injured, not days. Ambulances arrived with clockwork regularity. Medical helicopters, a technology unknown to German forces, transported critical cases with unprecedented speed. The systematic nature of American medical evacuation seemed to operate according to industrial principles rather than military improvisation. Paris. Hospitals absorbed thousands of American casualties with administrative precision that amazed German medical personnel. Facilities that had served French civilians were expanded and equipped with American medical technology. Electric lighting replaced gas fixtures. Refrigerated storage preserved blood plasma and medicines. Sterilization equipment maintained surgical standards that exceeded peacetime requirements. The harbor at Cherbourg revealed another dimension of American medical capability. Hospital ships docked regularly, their white hulls marked with red crosses visible from kilometers away. These floating medical facilities contained fully equipped operating theaters, X-ray departments, and laboratory facilities. German observers could hardly believe that Americans had constructed complete hospitals aboard ships and sailed them. Across the Atlantic Ocean, over 200,000 wounded Americans were evacuated by hospital ship during 1944 alone. This statistic represented more than medical achievement. It demonstrated American industrial capacity applied to the systematic preservation of human life on a scale never before attempted. Each evacuation required coordination between combat units, medical personnel, transportation networks, and receiving facilities. The speed of American medical evacuation had become a weapon in itself. German soldiers understood that wounds which might be survivable in American hands meant death if treated by German medical personnel operating under resource constraints. This knowledge created psychological pressure that affected German combat performance more than traditional military threats. American evacuation procedures revealed the systematic integration of medical planning into overall military strategy. Wounded soldiers were not abandoned casualties but temporary personnel requiring industrial-scale repair and return to service. The philosophical difference represented a fundamental contrast between American democratic values and German military tradition. Speed had become America's most decisive advantage. German medical systems operated according to scarcity and improvisation. American medical networks functioned with industrial precision and unlimited resources. The contrast determined not just individual survival rates, but the ultimate outcome of the European War. Night illuminated the contrast between American industrial might and German destruction. Across the United States, factory lights blazed through darkness as pharmaceutical plants operated continuously to meet military requirements. Meanwhile, German production facilities lay in ruins beneath smoke that rose from Allied bombing raids. American pharmaceutical output had increased tenfold between 1940 and 1944, transforming peacetime medical production into wartime abundance. Factory workers labored through round-the-clock shifts, producing medicines in quantities that exceeded German peacetime consumption by enormous margins. The statistical disparity revealed the fundamental difference between democratic industrial capacity and totalitarian resource limitations. Captured. German nurses recalled medical shortages that had reduced their healthcare system to medieval standards. They lacked clean gauze for basic wound care. Surgical instruments had been sharpened so frequently they barely functioned. Antibiotics existed only in rumor and captured American supplies. The contrast with American abundance seemed to violate natural law. Allied bombing had systematically destroyed German pharmaceutical production, creating shortages that made effective medical treatment impossible. Factories that had produced sulfa drugs lay in rubble. Chemical plants that synthesized medicines were reduced to twisted metal and broken concrete. The deliberate targeting of medical production represented strategic warfare at its most comprehensive level. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. German medical personnel operating under these conditions understood that they faced not just material shortages, but systematic industrial warfare. American bombers did not merely attack military targets. They destroyed the entire infrastructure that sustained German medical capabilities. The strategic bombing campaign had transformed medical treatment into a weapon of war. The psychological impact of this contrast demoralized German forces more effectively than battlefield defeats. Soldiers who understood that American industrial capacity could produce unlimited medical supplies while German production lay in ruins recognized the futility of continued resistance. Industrial war had rendered traditional military courage irrelevant. American factory production statistics told the story of democratic mobilization. Civilian workers who had never seen combat contributed directly to battlefield effectiveness through systematic production of life-saving medicines. The entire American home front had become an extension of military medical capability, creating sustainable advantage that no traditional military force could overcome. For every German shortage, America answered with surplus that seemed to mock the very concept of resource limitation. The abundance was not accidental but systematic, representing democratic industrial capacity applied to the preservation of human life on an unprecedented scale. An American private opened his eyes to sterile white sheets and the gentle hum of fluorescent lighting in an English base hospital. 3 weeks earlier, German artillery had torn through his abdomen near St. Vith. By all traditional military calculations, he should have been dead within hours. Instead, he was preparing to return to active duty. His evacuation from the battlefield had occurred with mechanical precision. Forward aid stations stabilized his condition, using abundant supplies of plasma and morphine. Ambulances transported him to field hospitals equipped with portable X-ray machines and electric surgical equipment. Hospital ships carried him across the Englische Channel to facilities that exceeded many peacetime hospitals. In their medical capabilities, the surgical procedures that saved his life were routine by American standards but miraculous by German measurements. Refrigerated blood plasma had replaced his lost blood. Penicillin prevented infection that would have been fatal without antibiotic treatment. Electric suction machines had maintained clear surgical fields during complex abdominal surgery. Sterile instruments and abundant anesthesia created optimal surgical conditions. His German counterpart would have died on the battlefield or in a primitive aid station lacking basic medical supplies. German medical doctrine accepted permanent casualty rates that American medicine had rendered obsolete through industrial abundance and systematic medical planning. The statistical difference represented more than medical technique. It demonstrated the power of democratic values applied to individual human preservation. American survival rates for battlefield. Wounds had reached 96% for soldiers who reached medical care by 1945. This achievement required not just medical skill but industrial coordination. On a scale that exceeded German comprehension. Every successful treatment represented the entire American production system working to preserve a single human life. The private's recovery and return to combat duty illustrated American military doctrine at its most fundamental level. Wounded soldiers were not permanent losses, but temporary personnel requiring systematic repair and restoration to service. This philosophical approach multiplied American combat effectiveness through medical intervention rather than personnel replacement. His story was repeated thousands of times across European battlefields. American medical abundance created sustainable military power that could outlast any enemy dependent on traditional methods of casualty replacement. Every healed soldier represented America's silent victory over armies that accepted permanent losses as inevitable military cost. The mathematics were simple and decisive. American forces maintained their strength indefinitely through medical treatment. German units lost personnel permanently to wounds that American medics treated routinely. Industrial medicine had become the most decisive weapon of the European war. Archive rooms filled with statistical charts and bound reports contained the numerical proof of American medical superiority. Rows of filing cabinets held documentation that revealed the scope of medical transformation. Between World War I and World War II, the data told a story of systematic improvement that bordered on miraculous. Casualty. Survival rates had increased from 70% in World War I to 96% in World War II for American forces. This 26% improvement represented millions of lives saved through medical advancement and industrial abundance. The statistical comparison revealed not just medical progress, but the systematic application of democratic industrial capacity to human preservation. Penicillin alone had reduced infection deaths by 85% compared with previous conflicts. This single medical advancement, mass-produced by American pharmaceutical companies, had eliminated categories of battlefield mortality that had plagued armies throughout human history. The industrial production of antibiotics represented warfare transformed by medical science and democratic manufacturing capacity. Blood plasma statistics demonstrated American logistical achievement on unprecedented scales. 13 million pints of processed blood plasma had been distributed to American forces worldwide. This figure represented systematic coordination between civilian blood donation, industrial processing, and global military distribution networks. The complexity and scope exceeded any previous medical undertaking in human history. German medical statistics provided stark contrast to American achievements. Casualty survival rates for German forces had declined throughout the war as medical supplies became unavailable and production facilities were destroyed by Allied bombing. By 1945, fewer than 50% of German wounded returned to active duty compared with American rates, exceeding 90%. The numerical disparity revealed the fundamental difference between democratic industrial mobilization and totalitarian resource limitation. American medical abundance was not accidental, but systematic, representing the coordinated effort of millions of civilians working to support military medical capabilities. German medical scarcity resulted from strategic bombing that deliberately targeted pharmaceutical production and medical supply. Networks. Medical officers who compiled these statistics understood their strategic significance. Numbers that seemed abstract represented individual human lives preserved through systematic medical intervention. Every percentage point of improved survival rates meant thousands of soldiers who lived rather than died, returned to duty rather than became permanent casualties. The war's truest miracle was measured in percentages that revealed democratic medicine at its most powerful. Statistical achievement had replaced military tradition as the decisive factor in modern warfare. American industrial capacity applied to medical treatment had rendered traditional military calculations obsolete post-war. Interrogation rooms in Allied facilities contained German medical officers and nurses who provided testimony about American medical capabilities they had witnessed during captivity. Their statements, recorded by military intelligence personnel, revealed German recognition of American medical superiority and its strategic implications. Captured German nurses described their astonishment at American field hospitals equipped with electric lighting, refrigerated storage, and abundant medical supplies. One nurse testified that American medics possessed more penicillin in a single field hospital than all German forces had received during the entire war. The abundance seemed to violate every assumption about military logistics and resource allocation. German medical officers admitted that American survival rates for battlefield wounds exceeded German peacetime hospital capabilities. They acknowledged that medical treatment available to American privates surpassed care reserved for German generals. The systematic equality of American medicals. Attention represented philosophical differences that extended beyond military doctrine into democratic values. Intelligence reports contained German recognition that medical abundance multiplied American combat effectiveness in ways that transcended traditional military calculations. One captured surgeon testified that we fought an enemy that healed faster than we could destroy them. This statement revealed German understanding of American medical capabilities as a decisive strategic weapon. German medical personnel described their shock at American evacuation procedures that transported wounded soldiers from battlefield to base hospital within hours rather than days. They witnessed helicopter evacuations, hospital ships, and systematic medical networks that operated with industrial precision. The coordination and resources seemed to belong to science fiction rather than military reality. Survival statistics provided quantitative proof of German medical inferiority. German abdominal wound survival rates remained below 50% throughout the war, while American equivalent procedures achieved 92% survival by 1945. The statistical disparity represented not just medical technique but industrial capacity applied to systematic human preservation. A German testimony revealed demoralization caused by understanding American medical superiority. Soldiers who knew that wounds survivable in American hands meant death in German care fought with the desperation of men who could not afford injury. This psychological factor affected German combat performance more than traditional military threats. The captured Germans. Medical personnel provided validation of American medical achievement from enemy perspective. Their testimony confirmed that American industrial medicine had created military advantages that traditional armies could not overcome through conventional means. Defeat was written not just in tanks and aircraft, but in syringes and plasma bottles. American hospitals in 1950 bore little resemblance to their pre-war predecessors. Penicillin lined pharmacy shelves in quantities that would have seemed impossible during the 1930s. Civilian medicine had inherited wartime medical advances that transformed healthcare throughout the United States and eventually the world. Veterans carried memories of battlefield medicine home to civilian communities where they shared stories of systematic medical abundance that had saved their lives and those of their comrades. These personal accounts spread understanding of medical capabilities developed during wartime emergency and applied to peacetime healing. The transition from military to civilian medicine represented democratization of advanced medical treatment. Blood banks operated in every major American city, continuing wartime practices that had proven essential for battlefield survival. Civilian populations donated blood with the understanding that systematic blood collection and processing could save lives during medical emergencies. The infrastructure developed for military purposes became permanent civilian medical capability. Penicillin production had scaled to treat millions of Americans annually, eliminating categories of infection that had caused routine deaths during previous decades. Pharmaceutical companies that had retooled for wartime production continued manufacturing antibiotics for civilian use. Mass production techniques developed for military requirements made life-saving medicines available to ordinary citizens. Medical schools taught surgical techniques and treatment protocols developed during battlefield conditions. Military medical experience had advanced civilian medical knowledge by decades in areas such as trauma surgery, blood transfusion, and antibiotic therapy. Wartime medical innovation became peacetime medical standard practice throughout American healthcare. The global impact extended beyond American borders as medical advances, developed for military use, became available worldwide. International organizations distributed penicillin and other antibiotics to countries lacking pharmaceutical production capabilities. American medical abundance during wartime became global medical advancement during peacetime. Statistical measurements revealed the scope of medical transformation. Infection mortality rates plummeted worldwide as antibiotics became available through civilian medical networks. Blood plasma processing eliminated categories of surgical risk that had limited medical intervention throughout human history. Wartime medical emergency had created peacetime medical revolution. Veterans understood that battlefield medicine had created civilian medical capabilities that exceeded pre-war imagination. Technologies developed to save soldiers' lives became routine treatment for civilian medical emergencies. The systematic preservation of human life during wartime had established principles and practices that would benefit humanity for generations. What began in Norman canvas tents became the foundation of modern medicine, representing victory that extended far beyond any battlefield. American medical abundance had created not just military advantage, but permanent advancement in human capability to preserve and restore life through systematic medical intervention. The war ended, but the memory of its hospitals did not. For the captured German nurses who once stood stunned beneath the canvas tents of Normandy, the images of America's medical abundance haunted them long after the Reich collapsed. In the silence of post-war Europe, they carried within their minds a vision of modern medicine that had seemed like sorcery, glowing electric lights, humming machines, endless rows of sterile bandages, and vials of penicillin flowing like rivers of life. Some of them returned to their ruined hometowns to discover hospitals reduced to rubble and clinics operating with bare hands and whispered prayers. Yet their memories of American medical practices became seeds of aspiration. They spoke quietly to colleagues, "We saw another way. We witnessed what is possible when science and industry work together, not to destroy, but to heal." At first, their testimony sounded like exaggeration, but gradually, as the Marshall Plan rebuilt Europe and American medicines flowed into devastated cities, those memories no longer seemed like fantasy. They were blueprints for the future. The war had demonstrated something new in human history, the healing arts. Once the province of individuals working with limited tools could be transformed into a system of mass preservation. America had not merely deployed doctors and nurses, it had mobilized entire industries, civilian populations, and logistical networks to create a medical machine capable of sustaining armies indefinitely. In doing so, it had set a precedent. The preservation of life could be industrialized, standardized, and scaled without limit. In the years that followed, this lesson shaped not only military medicine, but the entire landscape of healthcare. Blood banks became permanent civic institutions. Antibiotics became household words. Operating rooms acquired electric suction machines and sterilization equipment once considered wartime luxuries. Civilian hospitals learned to function with the same efficiency as field hospitals. The war's medical systems, designed to save soldiers, became the scaffolding for saving civilians in peacetime. The German nurses who once whispered in disbelief eventually practiced in hospitals where penicillin was dispensed by the bottle, where sterile gauze came sealed in packages rather than boiled in desperation, where electric machines replaced candlelight. They understood, perhaps more than their American counterparts, that they were living in a medical revolution. For them, the abundance that had once seemed like enemy sorcery had become the foundation of their daily work. But memory has shadows as well as light. They also remembered the scarcity, the boiled rags, the rationed morphine, the sharp smell of untreated infection in overcrowded wards. They remembered the despair in soldiers' eyes when told that nothing stronger than aspirin could be offered for shattered limbs. They remembered watching Americans discard used bandages with casual indifference, a gesture that once seemed like criminal waste, but later came to symbolize the wealth of a society that could afford to treat every life as valuable. These memories formed a double consciousness, awe at what had been possible, and grief at what had been denied to their own patients. Across the Atlantic, in the United States, the story carried a different resonance. For American veterans who had been saved by plasma transfusions, penicillin injections, or swift evacuation from battlefields, the abundance was not abstract. It was embodied in the scar that healed instead of festering, in the arm that was saved instead of amputated, in the life that continued instead of ending in the mud of Normandy. When they returned home, these veterans carried not only physical wounds, but also testimonies of a medical system that had treated them as precious assets, worth the cost of entire factories and shipping fleets. In their communities, these stories spread a new expectation that such care should not end with the war. If a private could receive penicillin in a field tent in France, why should a child in Kansas die of an infection for lack of antibiotics? If America could build hospital ships and evacuate soldiers across oceans, why could it not build networks of hospitals across its own states? The logic of wartime abundance became the moral argument for peacetime reform. Thus, the battlefield became the proving ground for modern healthcare. Lessons learned under fire shaped the creation of the National Blood Program, accelerated pharmaceutical innovation, and laid the groundwork for trauma care systems that still define emergency medicine today. What had been born of necessity became institutionalized as standard practice, and yet beneath the statistics and the systemic achievements, there remained the human stories. In Normandy, a German nurse had once watched an American medic kneel beside a wounded private, inserting a plasma needle into his arm with a calmness that belied the chaos outside the tent. She had whispered to her companion, "They treat him as if he were a general." That moment lingered in her memory, not because of the technology itself, but because of what it implied, a society that placed equal value on every soldier, no matter his rank. That memory, multiplied across countless witnesses, became part of the war's hidden legacy. Beyond tanks and bombers, beyond strategy and diplomacy, the conflict had revealed something profound. The way a society chooses to care for its wounded reflects its deepest values. America's industrial medicine had spoken a moral language that even enemies could understand. In Berlin, after the war, former officers studying captured American medical statistics understood the same truth in colder terms. They saw the mathematics of attrition, the survival rates that had tilted the balance of power, the divisions replenished by healed men rather than replaced by inexperienced recruits. They recognized that medical abundance had been not only a humanitarian triumph, but a weapon of war, as decisive as any artillery barrage. Their analyses became reports filed away in archives, but the conclusion was unmistakable. A nation that could heal faster than it was wounded could not be defeated by conventional means. By the 1950s, the world stood in a new medical age. Antibiotics reduced deaths from infection by orders of magnitude. Blood transfusions became routine. Hospitals gleamed with new machinery powered by electricity rather than hope. Civilian patients benefited from innovations born in combat. A child with pneumonia, a mother in childbirth, an accident victim on a highway, all inherited the abundance once reserved for soldiers in Normandy tents. The German nurses who survived the war lived long enough to see this transformation. Some practiced in hospitals rebuilt with American aid. Some emigrated and worked in the very country whose abundance had once left them speechless. Others retired quietly, their memories intact, recalling the night when generator lights cut through the mist near Carentan and revealed a future none of them had imagined. For them, the war had not only destroyed, it had also revealed. It showed that medicine could be more than scarcity, more than improvisation, more than survival for the few at the expense of the many. It could be abundance, systematic, industrial, and democratic in its promise. History records battles in terms of territory gained and armies defeated. Yet for those who walked among the hospital tents, the truest victory was measured in lives saved, in the sight of a wounded private opening his eyes to clean sheets and steady light, in the knowledge that tomorrow he would walk again. The epilogue of that war is written not only in treaties and borders, but in every modern hospital ward, in every vial of antibiotics, in every pint of donated blood. It is written in the silent gratitude of patients who will never know that their survival traces back to lessons learned under canvas in Normandy, and so the captured German nurses were right to be stunned. What they saw was not sorcery, but the future. A future in which abundance would no longer seem impossible, but expected. A future in which the preservation of life, once a fragile hope, had become an industrial certainty. The war ended, but the memory of abundance endured, and it continues to shape the world we live in. If you enjoyed the story, I unpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.